This is Gotham Investigations, and I'm your host, Jeff Giordano. Gangs, a group of individuals with defined leadership that engage in criminal and violent activity and usually take over and control a territory. The 24th Street Gang, the Jesse Menocal case. You're going to hear how gangs may influence their members to come forward and make false allegations. We're going to have a special guest on our show today, a gang expert from the City of Miami Police Department. Stay tuned and you'll get your answers. Sergeant Jesus Menocal, where Gotham Investigations was part of the defense team. The state attorney's office closeout memo revealed that the three alleged victims, the ones that came out first, all members of the 24th Avenue gang, came forward with similar sexual allegations against this sergeant. One of the individuals ended up jumping out of a vehicle and dying. There was not enough criminal evidence to move forward on charges, so they dropped the case, referring it back to the Hialeah Police Department for administrative purposes only. But that's only to have the feds pick it up and run away with it. We have a special guest on our show today, and he is Aquiles Carmona. Not only is he a special guest, he's a personal friend of mine who works side by side with me with the City of Miami Police Department. Even though we were in separate units, he was an expert in gangs and gang activity. And we're going to have several questions for him today. But not only did he move on from the City of Miami Police Department, as I did as well, and I do private investigations and security, he moved on to be a top dog assistant chief with the Sweetwater Police Department, who just came actually from the state attorney's office on a meeting involving human trafficking, which you may know involving this case involved human trafficking with this gang. So Aquiles, welcome to the show. And can you just tell us a little bit about your background and some of the fascinating schools you went to, the FBI Academy, the gang classes?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jeff, for having me here. And it's a great opportunity for me to speak a little bit about my experience and help you out with your project here, which is it's amazing. So first of all, thank you. I was with the City of Miami for about 25 years. About 16 of those years, I worked in the gang unit. I started my career there as a young police officer, and I really enjoyed what I was doing, so I stayed there probably a little longer than I should have, but it was good. I attended numerous street gang schools. I became a subject matter expert and testified both on a state and federal level as a subject matter expert in the topic and on some cases. I retired in 2015 from there, and I was hired by the city of Sweetwater as the assistant chief of police, where I oversee the administrative division as well as the investigative division, and I also overlook internal affairs. I have a bachelor's in criminal justice management and a master's in forensic investigations. I've attended the FBI LEADA courses as well as the SPI executive management school.
And one of the things that you're failing to mention as well, I don't know if we're going back like 20, 25 years, but you were also voted the sexiest police officer in Dade County, where I was the second runner-up. Is that correct? Can you explain what happened there?
Yeah, that was a while back. So it's too far back to even recall. That was in about 2001, I believe, when they came out with a recruiting poster. A recruiting poster over at the City of Miami Police Department. Yes, I still have a couple of those copies as well. Okay, I could bring you one next time I stop by.
I think I'm okay. I got plenty of real estate calendars here. But I'll just keep our friendship as that. I don't need a picture of you hanging in my office, but that's fantastic. So when we look at these gangs, you're in a gang. What happens if you're an officer, say, is hurting your bottom line? Every gang has different things that they're involved in. Some, their thing might be armed robberies. Some of them might be car break-ins. In this particular instance, the 24th Avenue gang was not just known for car break-ins, but it was also known for its prostitution, its human trafficking. If you're a member of a gang and you have one of the head gang members come to you and say, this officer is hurting our bottom line, is it a possibility, as the state attorney's office saw it was, that they would come forward with false allegations against this officer?
Well, that's always a possibility, and when you're talking about gangs, you have those that are street-level gangs, and then you have your more sophisticated and ones that are it jumps into organized crime. So yeah, with your street level gangs, they're very easy to identify, and they're very easy to also take control over. So in this case, I believe, and I'm not too specific on that one case, but where they were intimidated by a police officer. And,
Correct. Yes.
and that happens, whether it's a police officer or it's a person in a powerful position, and they could easily go ahead and take control of some of these street gangs where their members are younger, and they need the resources in order to survive.
So what would happen if, say, one of the head gang members says, you, talking to one of the girls in the gang, because there was a lot of girls in this gang, you need to make an allegation against this officer. What could be some of the retaliation factors if they were to say, no, I'm not going to participate in these allegations?
Well, if it's coming from one of their leaders or top lieutenants in the gang, because they do have ranks in their hierarchy, there could be severe punishment for that. I mean, they get beat up, they get tortured. I mean, it all depends on that particular gang. So yeah, they could suffer big consequences.
How do gangs recruit people? Do you just like knock on the door and say, I want to be part of your gang? Or do they actually go out there and participate in the recruitment?
So it's funny that you use the word recruitment, because yes, they do a lot of that. And if you're not part of that world, you may not even notice it, but it happens a lot in the schools, and it normally happens a lot in the middle schools. They go out there and they prey in the weak on those that need support, on those that need financial help, friendship, whether they're missing that family aspect at home or that friendship at school, and they start off with that, and then they later make them part of that gang, and they get walked in or raped in or beat in, and then it just becomes that more difficult for them to get out once they find out what type of world they've entered.
So when you're saying beat in, is there like an initiation that they have to go through?
It's an initiation, correct. It's exactly what it is, and you have to kind of like prove yourself to them. And they first tell you how they're going to be a family and they're going to be friends, but it changes very quickly, because when you go through this initiation, it's not something that a regular family would do to you. You know, your regular family doesn't beat you or it doesn't rape you, and that's exactly what they do to you in order to so that you can show their loyalty to that one gang that you want to participate in.
So we also noticed, like throughout our police career, a lot of these gang members, they don't turn on one another within the gang, and they don't turn into snitches, because I guess there's a big retaliation against them if they were to do that.
Of course. So that's one of the things that happens if you do become part of one of these gangs and you decide to make that big mistake. The turning on them, there's big consequences, and normally ends up not pretty at all. So it's very frowned upon in that world, and like I said, there's severe consequences to it. So it becomes very difficult for them to get out of that world once they're in there.
So, I mean, obviously, you see a lot of younger kids in these gangs from 15 to 23, 24. What happens throughout the years when the gang member gets older? Does he just say, I'm done, I'm out of here? How does he move on with his life? I know there's certain gangs like the MS-13 that you're just there for life, whether you like it or not. Can you explain what happens when somebody gets older? Are they still part of this gang? Do we have old people that are involved in gangs?
And again, I like to use the word consequence, because that's one of the consequences in joining these gangs. You do it at a very early age for whatever reason attracted you into that gang, and then as you grow older and you've kind of like think you know better now, it becomes very difficult. So as you get older and now you become either an attorney or a professional ball player or a business owner, and now you have the financial ability to support these gangs, they're not going to let you go. Now you become a way of, an alumni, a sponsor, and they're going to require for you to go ahead and support them financially, and they're not going to let you go that easy. So it becomes a very difficult time in your life. to try to break away from them.
So can you explain any incidents or cases you may work throughout your career involving ball players, for example, that may have been part of a gang and now they moved on to playing ball, where they're still becoming a victim with threats?
So I remember when I started gangs in the early 90s, there was a couple cases that were going on, and I was able to not be part of it, but at least learn from it, where you had some of these professional football players and basketball players that were a product of the inner city, and at one point of their life, or the younger life, they were gang members, and they had that special talent for sport, and were drafted and went on to college, and later on played professional ball, and they still owed their dues to that gang, and again they would support the gang financially and with drugs and facilitating it. So they also became, victim of these investigations or subjects of these investigations, and while they were having a professional and a life as an athlete.
So I guess a perfect example as well would be some of these rappers. You see, they're involved in drive-by shootings where they become a victim. They're murdered. Famous rappers, millions of dollars. Do you see when you see these things on TV? Do you say those were part of a gang and they just couldn't get out? They couldn't get away.
Absolutely, and it's like, again, part of this conversation where these talented young men and women in their younger years, they were recruited by the gangs, and later on became successful singers, rappers, athletes. And depending how deep they were in these gangs and how long they were, they're not just going to walk away. They're not going to let you walk away because now they need you, and before you needed them. So, and that's when you hear about these famous singers and so on. They're performing in an after party or whatever, the drive-by shootings and the murders that go on.
So on some of the cases we were actually working one with a MS-13 gang member that was left his country, El Salvador, and moved to the U.S., and he was recruited here on a soccer field, young kid at the time, and he was involved in 3 separate murders where they threatened his family. Now the defense team is trying to use it as a duress factor, threat by duress, that he was involved in this because he just couldn't get out. They were threatening the families and such. So how bad is it to have identifiable factors? Like he may have been just walking down the street, but he has this MS-13 gang tattoo on his arm, and now, oh, you're part of a gang. Well, no, I'm not anymore. I came from El Salvador. I'm straightening out my life. No, sucker. You got the identity. I mean, what do they put on their bodies to identify them as gang members? And I guess this happens in jails as well, correct?
So you have your prison gangs and your street level gangs, and part of their identifying factor, like you mentioned, would be tattoos and colors and clothing but the more permanent one would be tattoos. These individuals would tattoo their gang name on their bodies, and some either go as far as doing it in their face area and their neck area, which is a little bit more difficult to conceal. And you're absolutely right, Jeff. When you're out there walking, now you've outgrown it a little bit. You got kids. You're going to the movies, and you still have this MS-13 tattoo, like the one you mentioned, or Latin Keen, or whatever. And you're so used to it that you don't realize that it's visible to, a rival gang member that may be walking by and, did not get the email, for lack of better words, that you're no longer part of the gang, and you just identified yourself through that tattoo and got his attention. Meanwhile, you're buying popcorn for your daughter, and next thing you know, you're facing, the barrel of a shotgun or a pistol.
Because you're invading their territory. Can you explain a little bit about territories and how gangs work and what happens when another gang kind of infiltrates that territory, selling drugs or, in this case, prostitution?
So those were known as turf gangs, and turf gangs were local street gangs where they would take part of the community, and that would be where they would conduct their business. In this case, drug business. So you needed to be very familiar what area you were walking through, or trying to sell your narcotics there, because if you didn't do your homework and you went into somebody else's turf or territory and try to sell there, you were going to become a victim very quickly. And again, those were, the drive-by shootings that you would hear about in the news and wonder why did it happen, because there was no rhythm or rhyme to it, other than a gang member walked into the wrong territory, the wrong turf, and tried to sell some narcotics or whatnot in that area.
So obviously, being part of the defense team for Sergeant Jesus Menocal, there are things that we can't release to the public because they're part of a federal, you want to call it the defense, so discovery. But there are things that we can release, and those are all things that we do receiving public records. So we received a lot of public records from the Hialeah Police Department, IA complaints, et cetera. And a lot of those complaints, you had gang members complaining that the officer lifted my shirt up, the officer pulled my sleeve up on the arm. Is that common for a gang officer to look for tattoos and identify those tattoos?
So it is very common. And back when I was working gangs, they made it more obvious. And through time, they became smarter, and they knew that if they were to fly their colors, because again, each of these gangs would represent different colors to represent their gangs and so on, and as well as tattoos. When I was working gangs, they made it very obvious, so it made it very easy for us. And later on, they started concealing it. But we knew where, specific gangs were hang out at, and who some of the members were. And sometimes we had to identify new members. And we knew that they were concealing the tattoos either in their back, on their thighs, in their inner bicep and stuff. So it wouldn't be, unusual for us to ask you to lift up your shirt, lift up your pant legs, and so that we could go ahead and identify some of the markings you had in your body and be able to, identify you as a gang member.
So I know now there's a system, because we use it on some of our public records requests, and I think there was back then, you would fill in interrogation cards. We would interrogate any individuals.
The old 5-0 cards.
5-0 cards, yes, indeed. And we would, that's a good 5-0. Now that I look at it, I'm like, yeah, they're 5-0, the police. But I'm saying that was the name of it, the 5-0 card back then. There's a gang database, correct, that you would put these in, and it would interlink all the police departments together, where you can identify these gangs. I can remember even part of patrol, you have a group hanging together, hey, these guys are gang members, gang unit would come, you would start 5-0ing all of them. And get it. What kind of database is available out there for police, and how is this utilized by police departments?
So even back then, when I started in the early 90s, we came up with a group called the MAGTAF, Multi-Agency Gang Task Force. Because through our investigations and following some of these leads, we realized very quickly that these gang members travel. They could be in Broward, but they come to Dade County and they commit their crimes here. So it was pretty difficult to keep up with them, not working in Broward and being here in Dade. And we realized that we had to come up with something, and we did come up with a gang clearinghouse database, where if you were a police officer in Hialeah and I was a police officer in city of Miami and we worked gangs, any of those field cards that you would fill out with a particular gang member, you would enter it in a system that I, in the city of Miami, would also have access to. And we were able to share information that way, so that gang members that were traveling from Hialeah to Miami or from Miami to Broward, and we would stop you, and through your driver's license or the information you gave us, we would enter it into this data system, and we knew that John Doe here belonged to, the Latin Kings, a chapter in Broward or not. And obviously, once I made that contact, part of my job was to update any information that I got from you that day, so that when you went back home to Broward and a Broward gang investigator would stop you, he knew that you had visited the city of Miami, got arrested for a crime, or got stopped in the company of other gang members. So we found that very useful, and it worked a lot for us, because when you were working these cases, you were able to tie different crimes to the particular subjects.
And would you see that a particular gang were tied into specific crimes?
Absolutely, because again, like I said, and it was the job, and it only worked as good as the information you would put in there, right? So as a gang investigator, it was very important for you to document as much as you can when you had that contact with the particular gang member. And if it was in form of an arrest form, it was easy, because obviously that arrest form with the case number would go into the file and it pretty much explained itself. But when you came into a contact with one of them that wasn't really being arrested and it was just a field contact and an interview out there, it was also important that you would, whatever information you got from that contact, that you would put it into that database so that you would update your other co-workers and other departments.
And I believe Florida Department of Law Enforcement, they're the ones that maintain that database?
That is
now?
correct.
Okay.
And that is the umbrella that pretty much covers all of it and gives us the power through the whole state of Florida, so that we could go ahead through a MOU, work with different departments and detach officers as TFOs to other state or federal law enforcement, and they bring that information back home as well.
So, unfortunately today with social media, TikTok, all these things, it's different recruitment now for gangs, where they actually infiltrating themselves into children's chat rooms and stuff like that. But besides that, to say to the parents out there, what are some identifying factors that you can say, maybe my kid needs some help, maybe he's becoming a gang member? How can you identify those things on a child?
Well, it's great that you mentioned that, because like you said earlier when you started the interview, I just came from the state attorney where they're holding their annual Human Trafficking Forum. And the one thing that they were harping on to parents was become your kid's friend. Because if you don't, someone else is going to become their friend. And there was an individual there speaking that was a survivor from human trafficking. He was a victim. And what attracted him to the whole thing was, he wanted a phone very bad, and he couldn't get a phone at home. And this perpetrator, through the computer and pretty much offered him the phone, gave him what he wasn't getting at the house, and later on became a victim of human trafficking. Same thing happens to the gang members. Again, they're not getting the love, the friendship, and not that, as a parent, you can't afford to buy your kid everything they want. But the big thing that I would suggest and that we harp on a lot is become the friends, listen to them. Because if you don't listen to them, there's going to be an ear out there that's going to listen to them. And it's going to give them that love and that attention that they're looking for. And they use that as a fish hook to bring them in. And once they're in and they're roped in, it becomes that much more difficult to get them out.
So what a lot of our listeners, don't understand when you talk about human trafficking, it doesn't just involve prostitution. It could be, architectural labor, farm labor. It could be through marriage. Basically, what human trafficking is modern day slavery, for forced labor. And it's good that you should mention that, because I noticed you said him. A lot of people think, no, it's just girls that could be a victim of human trafficking. Can you explain a little bit more about human trafficking, how it works, and how it's not just girls out there that are becoming victims?
Well, I think you covered it very good, because, it's just not about prostitution. It becomes about labor. And like you said, modern day slavery. Modern day, anything that the person that it's your handler could benefit from you. So it could be work, prostitution, drugs, gangs. They own you. They own you, and they're benefiting from whatever it is that they're having you do for them. And it's become a pandemic, and it's big, and you're absolutely right. It's just not females. Unfortunately, those are the biggest population that we have as far as victim. But males are also victims in this horrific crime.
Can you explain also how sometimes human trafficking or even prostitution, how it could all be tied into the RICO statute? Can you maybe just explain a little bit about RICO?
So the RICO is it's a statute that's been around for a very, very long time, and it's used more now than it was back when I started investigations in the 90s. But pretty much it ties different crimes, and it puts them together, and when the same person is the one that is involved in it. So you committed a crime, and you committed it with your friends or with another gang member, and we're able to link it together, and that you've been benefiting, and the group that's been committing these crimes are benefiting. We're able to tie different crimes that happen in different places at different times and make you, the bad guy, a victim of the RICO Act.
Now, when we talk about conspiring, what a lot of people out there don't realize is sometimes they pop these individuals. When we say pop, they arrest them, and now they try to flip and turn people. And you might be an owner of a farm, and they might get you on the phone, one of these human traffickers, but it's a controlled call. If you could explain a little bit about a controlled call. And now they're saying, we got some labor for you. We brought these people in from another country, and we're only going to charge you, $6 an hour. And now you become a conspirator to human trafficking.
Well, the control call is it's a tool that we use in law enforcement through cooperation of either the victim or the bad guy, where we will call someone that is participating or conspiring in the crime that we're investigating. And it's a phone call that's done, obviously, with the consent of the person making the call, and it's recorded and it's used to prosecute and get more subjects involved in the crime that you're looking into. So again, it would be a phone call that is made from one party to a second party that is recorded and then later used for prosecution.
So people, especially in Florida, they kind of look at things and they're like, we don't have gangs in Florida, but we do have gangs in Florida still.
No, we have a lot of gangs in Florida. We have a lot of gangs in Dade County and Broward and in Monroe. And again, if you're not part of that world, it's sometimes difficult to identify them, especially in today's day where they've evolved and they've changed somewhat. And again, I refer back when I started, it was a lot more obvious. And just like the drug dealers, I mean, you worked narcotics, and back in the 80s, you would walk into these clubs in Coconut Grove, and and it was easy to identify the dopers. They wanted people to know that they were the kings of the club and the bars. And since they've gotten a lot smarter now, because they know that if you identify yourself that easy, you're going to make our jobs that much easier. Same thing with the gang members. Right now, you could be living in a community in a neighborhood and have the kids playing basketball, what you think are kids playing basketball in the park, and basically what they're doing, they're waiting for the person to drive by so they can stop the game and make their sale, or they're waiting for somebody to drive by and stop and try to play basketball there and rob them of their watches, their shoes. Shoes are a big item, so they'll hang out in the basketball court, wait until the young man shows up with his brand new Nikes, Air Jordans, and steal them from them. So they're a little tough to identify sometimes.
Can you explain a little bit about tagging and the purpose of a gang to I guess you would call tagging buildings, locations, expressways?
So the tagging and the graffiti. It's not always gang related. So you got to know what you're looking for. And, like I see your backdrop here in your wall, this is a form of graffiti, right? It could be. It's art, and it graffiti, and you're painting your walls, but it's obviously good taste, and and not gang related. So you would have to be able to identify when it's a tagger, and a tagger sometimes is also a gang member or used by gang members, and they use the word tag so they could go ahead and mark their territory. They'll go up to a billboard, a side of a building, especially in your area, or sometimes if they want to go ahead and create problems with an opposing or gang, they'll go and cross out your name of your gang and put their name and tag the name of the other person or the individual who's doing the writing on the wall. And those have been known as taggers, because exactly what they're doing, they're tagging something.
And why would they do it like on places that are death-defying, like high-end buildings, expressways?
Well, it's almost like you owning a building or a company, or you wanna go ahead and rent out the billboard with the most exposure, right? So you want to go on 995 and rent that billboard that's right on 163rd or whatnot, where there's a lot of traffic and it's going to get people's attention. You want to market your business so that people call you and inquire about same thing with them. If you're in a gang, you want to go ahead and tag a particular part in the building where it glorifies, it gives you exposure, it gives you exposure out there so people can see it.
So what I want to explain also to our viewers, listeners, is the gang unit is not just about getting out there, identifying kids, kicking ass, taking names, which we've done plenty of that in our day, but we've also done positive things. You guys done positive things. Some of those I had the pleasure of being invited to, the ropes course, sailing. Explain some of those programs, what you would use those programs for, how you would try to get these kids involved. And actually, I have to mention one of the gang members from your unit, from our department, Roque, who went to the extreme and brought one of the gang members, I guess, to his business, or brother-in-law's business, and the gang member married his daughter. That's taking things a little bit to the extreme.
It is.
But explain these two programs that the city was involved in, that you were involved in, and what they did for the kids.
So part of the job in the gang unit obviously was the proactive, where it's going out there, identifying, arresting, and preventing crime from happening. But a second phase of it, which was equally important, was the preventive and the educational part, where we went out to schools and we taught programs. It was called Great and Dare. And we also had other programs like the grasp course that we would teach kids to be confident, and we would go ahead and pair them up with other individuals that they didn't know, and it was almost like it was a self-esteem building course where they learn how to trust other individuals, and we would expose them to positive things so that they knew that there was another side out there other than that gang life that was being offered to them. So part of our job as gang investigators and detectives out there was not only arresting the bad guy, but also helping those that weren't too sure what they wanted to do, and they were walking that line, and that thin line. Do I become a gang member, or is there someone out there to help us? And we wanted to be that person out there to help you and let you know that, there were jobs out there that we'd be able to offer you. We would recommend you. We would help you. We would give you recommendations. And one of those special projects I worked on back in, I think it was 1994, because it's funny that you mentioned the story of having the individual marry his daughter, which I'm glad to say that wasn't me. There was a movie that was filmed here, and I was able to work with that group for about 4 months, and it was the movie The Substitute. It was Tom Berenger, and Mark Anthony worked in it, and it was filmed in Miami Senior High. And I was approached by the producer from Los Angeles, and somehow or another he got my name, and he knew that I was a somewhat subject matter expert in the field, and he asked me to get him at least 20 gang members to participate in the movie. I thought it was pretty crazy at first, but what a great opportunity it turned out to be, because he wanted to use real gang members in the movie as extras and, characters in the movie. And I warned him. I told him that that was going to be pretty tough, and that we would probably have to hire off-duty cops. And I remember the second day out there in the field, I had 20 gang members out there, and the scary part about it was they weren't all from the same gang. I had a couple individuals from different gangs. And I made the mistake that I had to break away and go out to a meeting, and I left them alone in the football field with the producers. And when I returned back, there was just this big riot going on in the football field. They were all fighting, and that was the second day. So later on, they all adjusted, and a few of them got speaking parts, became part of the
Actors Guild.
Actors Guild, and they were making back then crazy money, like $400 a day. A few of them went ahead and started taking acting classes, and others opened up their little businesses, and they saw what what working an honest living could do for you. So that was a great experience as well, and it was a challenge, and it was a risk, and a learning curve. But that was really good, and that was that movie, The Substitute, back in I think it was 1994.
Definitely a movie for our viewers to view in and tune in to see how these producers actually do use real people in real life for movies and movie sets, and great consultants, movie set consultants like yourself. But when we talk about team building, I remember the ropes course. It was dealing with high elements, and there was also exercises that we were doing with the gang members. It was kind of like a police officer, and this is your partner, a gang member, and to complete certain tasks, it needed to be done as a team.
and trust building exercises.
Correct.
So yeah, so it was the police officer paired off with a gang member, a potential gang member, and at the beginning, it was a 2-day course. We picked them up early on Saturday mornings, and it ended up on Sunday afternoons, if I recall correctly. And we were strangers at the beginning, that Saturday morning when we picked them up, and by the end of Sunday afternoon, we were almost best friends because that was part of the course. They wanted this young individual to trust the older person. In this case was the police officer, and it wasn't going to happen right away. And you could feel the tension at the beginning on that Saturday morning where no one really wanted to speak to each other. They didn't really trust us. We sat in a circle. We introduced ourselves. We were giving names. Everybody came up with a nickname that made them feel comfortable and pretty much described that person. And then you would speak a little bit about yourself and why you were there. And that was like the icebreaker. And then the course went on in different activities where the gang member or the young juvenile started trusting the police officer, who later grew to be a mentor and hopefully got him out of that lifestyle. So that was a great program that we did for quite a few years over there. And thank you for your help on that because you were very instrumental. And
I remember, not myself, not you as well, because we were like totally professionals throughout our career, but a lot of the officers did have flasks in their car, and they were like, you want me to do what with who? And like you said, from the beginning it was clashing, but by the end of the day, it's, everybody becomes on common ground, and you kind of understand one another's life and what they're doing there and how to get over these obstacles. And these sailing courses, the ropes course, they weren't just things that they directly got into. It was kind of like steps to get there. And I can remember the first step was Cazzola's Pizza. You would take a whole bunch of group there, and they'd be like, here they come again. But then afterwards, they did a little work, too, to get up to that course, right? You did some painting and painting over graffiti and stuff in the area. Explain a little bit how that benefited the community and also the impact that it had mentally on these gang members.
So these individuals that you would select to participate in, like I mentioned, the grass course, which was a Saturday and Sunday, but you don't really turn anybody around. I mean, they didn't become gang members overnight, and we're not going to convince them to walk out of that lifestyle overnight because it didn't happen overnight. So it just didn't end on that weekend. There were other programs that we had, and we injected them into them and make sure that they participated, like the sailing, which was with that organization out of Concord Grove, Shake a Leg, and they were pretty much handicapped sailors that would take out these gang members, obviously under our supervision, and take them out sailing for a day. And these gang members and these troubled youth would see that this person that was, in a wheelchair or missing an arm or missing a leg was able to go out and sail a boat, and sailing wasn't easy, and they saw that, and obviously, then we would take them out and also do what you just mentioned, the painting of the community, the graffiti that was out there, the tagging, so that they could see the hard work that it took for the business owner, the homeowner, or that resident to paint over the graffiti that a gang member or a tagger was doing, thinking that it was a joke, or it was a joke to them, but not for the person that lives there. So on those days, they would participate and spend a whole day with us out there under the hot sun with a roller and some paint, painting over some of this graffiti that perhaps they didn't do, but someone like them may have done. And hopefully by them helping us out, they would go out there and speak to their friends and say, that's not cool. If that person does not want that artwork or that graffiti on their property, maybe we shouldn't be putting it there. Maybe we should ask for permission and come up with something that, they want to do, because some of these individuals are very talented. I mean, I'm not too sure who did your work here, but, this person could have started out as a tagger out in the neighborhood and later found, his calling as an artist, and, does great work, and it's a positive image and a positive message to the community when it's done correctly, not when you're writing your name in my front yard when you don't live there. So
well, just to set the record straight, it was a famous artist from Colombia during Art Basel. So I want to cheers on that. Yeah. And Gotham Investigations, Sergeant Jesus Menocal, soon you will be the judge, and a jury will be the judge. Is Sergeant Menocal a decorated police sergeant, or is he a sexual predator? The trial is coming up. You decide. Stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you for tuning in. Are you a fan of our show? Do you like our show? Then comment, hit the like button, and subscribe, or you might be the next one we investigate.